just before we start the show, I want to take an opportunity to invite you to join me for the Podfluence Weekly newsletter, which is available both on LinkedIn and through the official newsletter channel. Now, if you are on LinkedIn and it's easier for you to follow there, then please just click on the link in the show notes, which will take you straight to Podfluence on LinkedIn, where you can subscribe for free and get weekly updates on Podfluence articles as well as episodes. If you would like to subscribe to the full newsletter where you'll get additional materials and, as my little incentive to you, my pre-podcast guest checklist for you to use when you're appearing on podcast shows so that you can be fully prepared every single time, then please click the link to the official newsletter in the show notes. Hope to see you there. Let's get on with the show. This is one episode of the Loki podcast you do not want to miss. I'm joined by presentation trainer, former dominatrix, and all-round badass Dana Pharant. Whilst there's no graphic content in our conversation, we certainly touch on some adult themes specifically relating to Dana's life and experience as a dominatrix. If you are under the age of 16, or maybe you are a bit sensitive to these sorts of topics, this may not be the podcast for you. If this is the right podcast for you, I promise you, you are in for a treat. Welcome to the Loki Podcast with John Ball from Present Influence. We use Buzzsprout to upload and distribute the Loki podcast to all major podcasting networks. If you're thinking of starting your own podcast, check out the link to Buzzsprout in the show notes. You could start your podcast today. This week, I'm very excited to have with me a very special guest who has agreed to join us, the biggest badass I've ever had on the show so far, for sure. Please welcome to the show, Dana Pharant. Hi, Dana.
Oh, thank you, John. I love that. The biggest badass. I love it.
I think it has to be true. Dana, if you haven't encountered Dana before, she's a business performance coach, and having come from being a seven-figure business owner and a former dominatrix, then you may also come across some of her books or her speeches in the past. You're just an amazing person. I was super happy to get introduced to you, and I really couldn't wait to speak to you. You remember when I first contacted you, I was a bit like, I had a hyperactivity disorder.
Yes, we had a lot of conversation prior to even getting on to our initial interview conversation, but it was lovely because we connected over some similarities in what we're interested in, what our little fascinations are. And of course, so I'll reveal it that I was doing my due diligence and researching some of your past episodes, and you mentioned in there about the fact that you were fascinated by cults and mind control. Yeah. And of course, my background is that I grew up in a cult. And so it also has a fascination for me. I've studied into that world as well. So we've clicked on that level, and then we've also clicked on the piece about the fascination of how the dominatrix piece lends into both business and presentation. So
yes, and also for me, and I may have mentioned this the last time we spoke, but for the audience particularly, for me, it's really one of the things that I think is very important at the moment. Even though I'm not a woman, obviously, I care very much about female empowerment. I think women are in a position now where they should be seeing more in positions. We're seeing like women who are in positions of power who are doing amazing jobs around the world, that maybe we should have more women in power. It's just that time of the suppression has gone on long enough. The glass ceiling has been there long enough. Let's just break through all that, because it is time for everybody to be living their best selves and having whatever expression they want and stepping into their power. And there's no reason why women especially shouldn't be doing that. I was thinking just before speaking today that growing up, I grew up with I was obsessed as a child with Wonder Woman, the Linda Carter original Linda Carter series. So I'm old enough to remember it when it was on TV, and I was obsessed with that. I thought she was amazing. I still think that she was and is amazing. And then a bit further on down the line, as I was a bit older, Buffy the Vampire Slayer was my next big obsession.
Oh my God.
Powerful women. It was so necessary and so needed. And also these are things that developed such big followings, I think, because people did really get how important it was and how powerful a message that was, especially for women.
Yeah. And I love, like, with Buffy the Vampire Slayer, I love the character they created for her because they made her more multidimensional. So Wonder Woman was awesome. She was very powerful. And then in her day to day, she was kind of, just an average person. But with Buffy the Vampire Slayer, they kind of took that a little further in, she had all these quirky things in her regular life. And, she picked the bad boys and, that wasn't working well. So it was really interesting to see this more dynamic. And I think we've progressed, actually. I'm going to carry on with this. We progressed, and we look at, like, one of my other ones that I love was Star Trek, the Voyager.
Yes.
And Captain Jane, Janeway, she was another one that was just, she was powerful, but she was feminine, and she led in a way that was very, empowering for women. I loved her as a role model. And then, of course, my more recent one that I love pulling from the stage is the show Billions. So I'm not sure if you know the character Wendy. Oh, you've got to watch Billions. You will love that.
Yeah.
Yes. So Wendy, I love pointing to for mostly because she's like me. She is a dominatrix in her personal life,
right.
And although I'm former, but she is. And then she pulls that into her coaching, where she really shows up as this great badass who holds her space. She takes people to task, and she does it in a way that she stays in her feminine power. So I love that, it's interesting, that progression, right? When this is what we've come to, is this more holistic look at what is feminine power, what is an authentic empowerment for women.
Yeah, that was really, I think, one of the reasons why I was so excited to speak to you. And then when we actually got communicating, I just got more and more excited. All these things in common, all these areas of common interest. And you said that you'd be happy to come back and record an episode where we'll talk about the cult past and experience. But that's not what we're going to focus on so much today, although it may crop up in some of the stories. But from where you've been in life to where you are now, that's quite a journey to have been a former dominant. I think it's important to ask questions in the right order, so I'm trying to make sure that I do this. First of all, I'm sure you don't wake up one day and just think, I think I'm going to be a dominatrix. So how did that happen?
Yeah, and it's not exactly on the list of, childhood dreams of like, I think I'll go and...
I did my careers guidance at school. I don't think that was one of the options.
No, it would be a good option that they would bring forward for people, but regardless. So the progress for me is that, we touched on the fact that I grew up in a cult, and with that, of course, most of the time, people also have a lot of abuse that they are dealing with in surrounding that. And so leaving the cult, I went on a very long journey of untangling all the different pieces of both the mind control, but also all of the abuse that I went through. And I've, kept finding different things. I kept looking for different things. And I ended up finding the most profound healing in the dungeon. And it wasn't like I was, setting out to say, I think I'm going to untangle my sexual abuse by getting beaten. Yes, that sounds like a logical thing to do. And yet that's what ends up happening, because, and again, this is, dispelling some of the misnomers. We think of a dominatrix as what Hollywood portrays.
Yeah.
Hollywood does a terrible job of portraying any profession. So Hollywood portrays this, mean, nasty person who it's all about them, they're in control, and the other person doesn't matter. And that's not actually what happens. What is actually happening is that you negotiate prior to getting into a scene. And we call them scenes because it's rarely about sex. And again, like, that's where, Hollywood takes it down that area because they like doing that.
Sure.
But, in essence, the real, beautiful pieces are not about sex, and it's about this deeper transformation. So you have to have a really good conversation about what's okay, what's not okay, what are trigger words, what are things that, are going to push the limits too far, what's on the edge, having all of that discussion, crafting out a loose script, just like we would for a scene, and moving through and staying really, really present with the other person so that they can drop in and experience a sense of, I can go further than I thought I could. I am stronger than I thought I was. And so that experience, much like extreme sports, when you push yourself to your limits, then you start to see who you really are at the core. And that's the beauty for me of the transformation.
Right.
And when I had that experience for myself, then I was like, oh my goodness, I want to take other people on this journey.
Yeah.
So that's how that came about.
I know that when we had a chat before, which I wish I'd recorded that, to be honest with you, because it was such a good chat, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to recreate it exactly as that, but I'll do my best. But I mentioned that that one of the things that I was thinking about in terms of the persona of the dominatrix was relating it to, in some way, to drag. Like I'm an obsessive fan of RuPaul's Drag Race. I absolutely love it as an art form. And one of the things that a lot of drag performers will say is that they feel very liberated by their persona, that when they've gone through the transformation, and often it's the final thing of like putting on the wig and being fully made up and dressed up, that is when the persona comes out and they can be who they really want to be. It's almost like a true expression of themselves. They can act badass, they can act a bit more cheeky, they can they can really express themselves in ways that they may feel limited or restricted by in their normal lives. And I was imagining that maybe that is, from what you're saying, there are some similarities in how that goes.
There's some similarities, and yet there's some really big differences in that, yes, it gets to be an expression of who you are, and you have to embody it, much like drag. So drag, you get to take and create this persona, and it comes from within. Like a lot of the great drag queens, the persona comes from who they are, and so that piece of like, oh, I get to be this other side, and I have this reason. I have the wig and I have all the costume, and I get to be really above and beyond, just over the top. And that is fabulous. And I think there's a piece of having a deeper expression of who you are, but in the dominatrix world, because there's this piece of you are actually in charge of the other person, you're responsible for the other person, you're actually on. So it's much more of a high level service position, as opposed to I get to be in control and leading. And yes, there's a large element of that, and which is why a lot of dominatrixes are control freaks. But ultimately, we are also really compassionate and caring about who it is that we're working with, because literally their life is in your hands.
Right.
Some of the things that you're doing. So you have to be aware of what is going on with them. It is not all about you. So there is some differences and some similarities. Yeah,
right. I mean, there has to be a huge relationship of deep trust there, then, really, doesn't it? And that's super important. One of the things that we had spoken about before that I was fascinated about, that you had maybe kind of confirmed some of my my ideas about this a bit, was about that many people who would maybe be seeking out a dominatrix is not, as you say, mainly it's not a sexual thing. But a big part of it is to do with maybe they have a lot of responsibility in their lives and they want someone else to be calling the shots, to be in charge, to completely take away their responsibility so they're at your mercy. It's a mental break for them to be able to move to get rid of that, take that off for a while and just be in someone else's care. So can you say a bit more about that? Because I think that's fascinating.
It is fascinating. And it's like, that's the typical, right? We see a lot of that, because you have like the high-powered executive. Here's the classic person that goes to a dominatrix. High-powered executive is in charge, is making decisions. Maybe they're running a company that has a lot of stress, a lot of pressure. They're making, life altering, consequencing decisions of the people that they're working with, or they feel that pressure. And, they're large and in charge when they're at work. And then, in order to really let go, in order to really have that opposite experience, then they have to get into a situation where somebody else is taking charge, and somebody else is willing to like really take charge and not let them get back to their old ways. If you're saying you want to submit, well, then I'm going to make sure that you follow up on that. And I'm not going to let you out of that. And that's the piece where it's like the dominatrix has to step up. And I can feel myself already like, get my whip out, right? And it's that piece of stepping into that role where it is authentic. It is like, I'm willing to be in charge. And I'm coming at it from your own good, because you've said you want to surrender. You said you want to drop into this. Well, then, damn it, here's the fastest way to do it. We're going to like beat you into submission, but for the reason of dropping into what we call in the world, we call it subspace. And subspace would be closest linked to, where somebody gets after years and years of transcendental meditation. It's that really deep space of nothing else exists, no time, no space. Everything's just this moment right here, and they're fully present. And that's what people are looking for. So it's not so much that they want to be beaten. I mean, there are some that, it's unhealthy, but really they're looking for what is the end game? What is that ultimate, right? So whether you go extreme sports or dominatrix, it's kind of the same ultimate result.
I'm sure I'm not the only person that might be surprised to hear that there is a connection between the dominatrix world, I guess it's the kink world, right? I think you described it
before. That's applying kink,
and transcendental experiences. They're not two things you would naturally assume go together.
No, but we look at ancient spiritual practices as a whole. Most of them have some sort of component that requires you to go through pain, suffering, endured torture, so to speak. So whether it's the native culture where you go on a spiritual vision quest and you fast for 21 days and you expose yourself to the elements, I don't know. Personally, I think that's a whole lot more extreme than being in the dungeon. Yeah. But, every spiritual ancient practice has something that you go through an extreme experience in order to transform.
The rites of passage. It's interesting. I mean, I think it's one of those things that I do sometimes think that it's almost missing now, so it's needed in modern culture, these rites of passage that we used to have. And you see like some older traditional cultures still very much have them. And we've maybe in more modern life adopted some not so good ones, but I was thinking about like college hazing and things like that. Maybe not. So,
yes,
but I mean the considered rites of passage. But the sort of marking the thing of reaching adulthood and having that sort of also connection, I think, with people of your own gender. Like when you're becoming a man, you connect with the men in your community. When you're becoming a woman, you connect with the women in your community. That you have those sorts of connections and role models and the community that goes with that. It is like on a psychological level, it's almost sad that those things are missing, because they're a huge part of the ways that we really designed to interconnect with each other and have done historically. We've moved so much away from it.
Yeah, it is really sad. And I think a lot of that community connection, yes, it can go kind of sideways, but I think one of the things that we're really missing is this, course correct. Because when you have a strong community, when you have your tribe, then, people can come along and say, hey, John, listen, the police science is like, can we just correct this? Because like that behavior is not really working for the community. We need you to like, get it together, what's going on, and have a little conversation. But what we have instead is we have situations where like social media brings out the worst of people, and nobody's doing any kind of checks and balances. Nobody's saying, hey, that's not good. Don't do that. Maybe what else what are you trying to get? What are you trying to do? There isn't that piece, because if you do it in social media, then all you do is just flare up the person's,
you'll get trolled.
Triggers and traumas, and yeah, we've seen where that goes.
Yeah, it's not good, and it's not pretty. But yeah, it's those personal connections and that community behind it that is missing for so many people and in so much of modern life. But not completely. There are definitely some parts of it, but probably not nearly enough. But to move on from that, then the whole sort of idea of the dominatrix is fascinating, just in terms of the authority. And my focus in the podcast is a lot about the presentation and the influence, and the very image. Even just thinking about the word dominatrix conjures up very strong interpretations, very strong visuals in both of those, in terms of the presentation and the influence side of it as well. And what does that mean for you? Because you've brought some of that into what you do now. So what has it meant for you then and now?
Okay.
Sense is a question.
No, it's like, okay, that's a really big question. So as far as let's deal with the presentation. So here's what I find is that for me, when I go on stage, I love bringing a little bit of the energy of who I needed to become, like who I would step into to be that dominatrix. And it's, who I became, because it's very integrated with me. But there are times when it's on and there are times when it's off. So getting on stage very much is that on. So, that piece where I was saying it's about being high level service. So when I'm presenting, I'm aware of what is going on in the room. I'm aware of being present. I'm also really going to bring in those pieces of being willing to be in charge. So if there's something going on in the room that is really distracting from what is going on, I will call it out. And I'll do it in a nice way now. I of course, I won't whip people from the stage. That's not really going to work. But, if you've got somebody who's, say the serving staff has walked in, I've been at presentations where the serving staff is walking in, they're clinging and clanging and trying to pick up the dishes, then I will pause. And I will say, I will pause until everybody's looking, because now they're the only noise. And then I'm like, can you hold the clearing of the plates until we're done?
Yeah.
And that takes power. That takes a willingness to make it, because to stand on stage, to stand on stage and say nothing is a powerful pose, and it makes the speaker and everybody else uncomfortable. So this is where, for me, I get so excited about this energy of the dominatrix, because I've spent my time making people uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a thrill for me. It's like, oh, you don't like that? Oh, good. Yay. So that's where I translate that for being on stage. What was the other half of that question? I've already lost it. Sorry.
Maybe the authority, the influence side.
So the authority, again, as well as holding your presence on stage, because that's really powerful, there's also the piece of owning your expertise. So if you happen to be a speaker that does, say, speak to sell in particular, you need to really own and embody your expertise, and you need to convey that without the standing there, the blah, 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 and I did this and I did that. It's really having it integrated and owned in your body so that you can weave it in. And it's like, for me, I stand on stage and I can talk about when I had a 7-figure business, and I can just weave it in, and there's no bugaboos about that. So that's that owning the authority and owning the power on stage.
It is. It is just coming up for me whilst you were speaking that hopefully I can say this, because I don't think my dad generally listens to my podcast, although I can't guarantee he won't listen to this one. But when my dad tells stories about things that have happened or some sort of confrontation and stuff like that, I always know he's telling me what he wished he'd said, as if he actually said it. And I'm sort of thinking, this is that. So I think that's probably where most people are. We'll probably try, we want to be the hero of our own stories, and but to actually live that is so much more empowering, and it does take a level of assuming authority and demanding it as well.
Yeah, and the flip side is being willing to own where you've, quote unquote, failed. I mean, I personally don't believe in the idea of success or failure, that, right and wrong. Yeah. But if we embrace it the way that typically that people say, when you can really embrace your failures and own them as well, now you can speak to your stories and you don't have to make things up, because people can see through that, especially now. Maybe 20 years ago, we could BS people on the stage and people would buy it and be like, oh, ooh, ah, right? But nowadays people are like, yeah, that smells really fishy. No. And they'll discredit you. So yeah. You really need to be owning it from a truthful, honest place.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, I've been working around the sort of training and teaching public speaking skills for a long time, and I say one of the things I come across and come up against really more than anything else is this thing of people have this imagination of that they're going to get up on a stage and someone's going to say, "You don't know anything. Let me tell you exactly what it is." It's like that doesn't really happen, but you do have to understand that more people are more knowledgeable now, have access to more information. So you do need to deliver some really good value, and you need to deliver it with confidence as well. And it's probably not a bad idea to know how to handle those kinds of people and interruptions when they come up as well.
Yeah, in a way that doesn't distract from what's going on. If you little things like anything from, you've got a moment of silence in the presentation and somebody's phone rings. Well, you can either berate the person and make them feel small and stupid. You're like, "Oh, I asked you to turn that off at the beginning." Like, that would be rather rude. Or it could be like, "Oh, I guess that's our timer." Like making it fun and
utilize it. Yeah.
Utilize it, right? That's that staying present. And again, that's where, another piece that I draw from the time in the dungeon is that you had to be fully present for the whole session. And sometimes sessions were like 4 hours. So you really got to bring it, and you've got to be there.
It's a bit hard for me to imagine. It's my only knowledge of it is from what we've talked about and from Hollywood. So I have a very limited insight into that world, but it is nonetheless fascinating. Are there any stories or things that happen that really stand out for you, or were real either learning events for you, or just super memorable from that time?
I'd say, one that's kind of applicable here is when I was first starting to transition over. So I started out as in the submissive side, experienced that, had a lot of healing, and then I was really drawn to drop into the dominatrix side. And I was at a private party, and there was a woman who she really embodied it. This is who she was. This was not a persona. And she had been this for probably about 10 years. And so we're sitting there, and so I'm just starting to get comfortable with this and starting to own it. But I could hang out with her and just feel the energy, feel the vibe, watch how she interacted with her submissive, and watching that dynamic. And that was really powerful for me. And then I could just, try it out and, test these little pieces out of like, oh, okay, noticing. So for me, one of the things that I thought was fascinating was the fact that the submissive, the more she held her power, the more she really stayed in that place of, yes, serve me. You're here to serve me, and really held that space, the more that he would glow. And that same night I had this lovely fellow who loved to do foot worship. And he just, it was like I was sitting there, and he kind of like just snuck in. It was almost like he just kind of like, oozed in under my feet. And before you know it, here's this person who's just like, "May I rub your feet?" Right? Like just this really lovely, sweet person. So the more that I was claiming that dominatrix energy, the more I could see he was enjoying serving. And so it really reinforced that piece of when I stand in my power, it makes it so that other people can relax. It makes it more enjoyable for other people. And it gave me permission at that point to really claim that and be it.
Mm. Interestingly, my thoughts are that the UK, England particularly, is maybe viewed globally as being quite a prudish place, and that we're all sort of still in Victorian times, and we'll go back to our castles at the end of the day, kind of thing. It's how a lot of people seem to see it, which is very far from the truth. And yet, on a sort of puritanical morality sort of side, I see the US as generally being more along those sorts of paths, and across the water being much more having much more of a puritanical morality to them, maybe a bit more associated to the Victorian side. That is interesting because it almost makes things like the kink world even more salacious, even more exciting in some ways, because there's all these people who disapprove of it and are going to tap their eyes. But maybe also interesting from a just from the sort of side of psychologically acceptance and being accepted by the greater majority, that most of us always want that acceptance, that sometimes when you go into these worlds, and I say that maybe partly my own experience from entering more of the gay community as I grew up, that you find your own place and what those other people think matters so much less. Would you relate to any of that?
Absolutely. There's like a lot of people start into the kink world and, going to events and things, and it becomes this like, that finally I can let go. Finally, I can, release the shackles of all the prudent pieces, and you found a tribe of people who are also all liberated and willing to express this. And so sometimes you get a little starry-eyed in the beginning and dive off the deep end. And then gradually it's like, oh, well, let me just find my own rhythm in here. What is it that actually works for me, instead of, being led down the garden path by other people's ideas. And that's where I see like the beauty of these kinds of explorations for people, is when you can get to that level where it becomes a matter of like, oh, what are you doing and why are you doing that? And it doesn't sound like something I want to do, but I'm fascinated as to why. And getting that bigger, broader perspective also allows you to have a broader perspective in life. But like everywhere, there are some people that remain narrow-minded, and it's like, my kink is good and your kink is bad,
Right.
Just like the rest of the world. But I see the potential for people to expand their horizons, to at least be open-minded, even if it's not something you want to physically explore.
Yeah. It is fascinating insights, and so those perspectives make so much more sense than just viewing it from it's all about sex, or it's just all about people trying to overcome abuse. There's like, on a psychological level, there's so much more to it. It's not that those things aren't connected in ways, but it is those psychological relationships, the power balances, the understanding of how as you said, transcendental it could be to give complete authority over to someone else. How empowering for someone like yourself, perhaps, to step into that role and really discover and channel this level of authority and command. And so empowerment is a big part of what you do now. How much of the dominatrix comes into what you do now?
So at this point now, it's for me, it's at the energy of the dominatrix, as opposed to, people really stepping into using the physical tools of the dominatrix. And what that is for me is stepping into a confidence. So I often call it a bulletproof confidence, because it comes from within as opposed to an external source. This piece of being willing to lose everything, being willing to be judged, and not just being willing to be judged, but like welcoming it in. That's a whole nother level. For me, there's a very spiritual aspect to it. So getting connected to your intuition, following those deeper nudges, and that bigger perspective of, what if there's nothing right or wrong in anything, and we're here having an experience, and then it's a freedom to create what we want, with the perspective of, still stepping into that dominatrix piece of like, I still need to be aware of what works for other people, still being a good human, and how do I want to experience life. So that's kind of the overview of now how the dominatrix is an archetype for women in particular in business to step into.
Yeah. What would you say then are the most positive traits of the dominatrix archetype?
Well, all the things I just talked about, but I would say for most people, what is really attractive is the confidence and the piece around, how we can turn judgment into fuel, and using that to drive us forward as opposed to holding us back.
Yeah. From the psychological side, then, once again, which to me, psychology has always been a fascinating area. But in terms of your own sort of natural power relationships with people, you mentioned earlier about how that can be when you're from the stage. Does any of that play out in other parts of your life as well? that you find yourself a bit more assertive, a bit more.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If I walk in somewhere and it's kind of they're a leaderless ship, I just can't leave it alone, and I have to step in. I remember a friend of mine, she was moving, and she was that chicken running around, and nobody was getting a direction. So I just stepped in and I started directing. I'm like, directing her. I was like, okay, you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. And I'm like, you go here, you go here. And I basically spent the day just directing everybody because I'm willing to step in and hold that authority power. My husband, he likes to laugh at me because he refuses to follow my directions when we're driving because he says to me that you will go confidently in the wrong direction because I sound so confident in my say, yes, we're going right. And then I'm like, oh, no, that was left. So, now we have to use Google instead of my directions.
I'm terrible at giving directions. I relied completely on Google Maps and yeah. Hopeless without it. I don't know how we ever coped with map books before we had all of those things. But
right? Thank goodness for GPS.
Changed the world.
Yeah.
So in what you actually teach and present now as well, what are your goals or your primary values about what you're offering now?
So my main topics is in around dealing with fear or anxiety. So giving people new ways to shift how they're handling that. Negotiation, of course, is a real strong skill set from the dominatrix world.
Right.
And then the other one that I love to lead with is navigating difficult conversations, because there's a lot of, the internal piece of what's going on of why people won't lean in to those difficult conversations. And yet, in business in particular, I see it over and over again. If I see a business owner who is, avoiding those confrontational kind of conversations, I guarantee that at some point they are going to hit a catastrophe because that will trip it up.
I have a friend in the UK. He may or may not listen to this, as you know who is, but it's not. This isn't embarrassing. This is very much in her favor. But she's one of those people who she's never afraid to ask for anything or to demand what she wants. And it's in a similar kind of energy. I sense that we went out in London sometimes and going out to, if we decided to go to an attraction, she'll try and get them a discount even if they're not offering any discounts. We go out for a meal, she'll see if we can get a deduction. If you live and go into the makeup counter and try and get them to knock some money off the price, she's just that kind of person. She doesn't care what people are going to think of her. She's going to do her best to get the best deal. And that's the kind of person. She is tremendous fun to hang out with. One time we snuck into a famous London attraction through the gift shop through the back entrance. I was convinced the whole time that we were going to get caught and arrested or something, but we didn't. And I'm not saying which one it was in case they got video footage of that time. I mean, the attraction itself was terrible. I'm glad we didn't pay all the money for it. But the fun of it was that we'd snuck in. But she's just that kind of person. Like, I'm going to get my own way, and I'm going to get a result here. I'm going to get something, and I'm not going to be afraid to ask for it. And I just love that energy. Is much more unafraid than I am. And I find you talking about sort of confrontational situations as something that I struggle with, and I know lots of people do as well. And I think people are generally afraid of it. I will do it, but I find it very, very hard. Like I might be shaking when I do it or something, but I will do it. Whereas a lot of people will walk away, or that negative feeling or the fear of the confrontation will scare them back from doing it. What sort of things would you work with someone on then to help them become more confident, or when a confrontational situation becomes necessary, to be able to stand their ground and to be able to hold themselves in a powerful way?
Yeah, great question. So generally what happens is that we've got to look at, first layer is what is it that you're avoiding, and what has been linked to this. So if you were to confront them, then we got to dig into the subconscious and say, what's going on there? Why is your subconscious thinking that it's keeping you safe by avoiding the confrontation? move that programming out so that you're not butting up against this safety factor. Because as long as your subconscious brain thinks that you're going to be safe by avoiding confrontation, you will constantly avoid confrontation, because that's the way our subconscious works. So we have to change that programming so it stops hitting the button. Then the next layer is looking at, if we need to, adding in the piece of like being willing to lose. And, again, clearing off and changing the programming that is around this idea that I'm going to lose XYZ, or losing is bad, failing is bad, changing those kinds of pieces. Then when we have those two layers cleared off, when our psyche is set where that it's safe to move forward, then the actual conversation, the skills of the conversation are very simple. That becomes a matter of like, okay, so here's the simple steps that we can walk you through. You need to, empathize with them. You need to find out what is it that they need? Why did this come up? Asking those questions. But if you don't do the inner work first, it becomes a landmine. And it doesn't matter how many of the skills I give you, even if I give you the entire outline of what you need to do, if we haven't changed the inner landscape, you're not actually going to do it.
Right. It's incredible, really, how much some people will go, how the lengths people will go to avoid confrontation and to not stand up for themselves. And popped into my head, and I haven't thought about this for a long time, but one time I was in London with my friend Chris, who I used to work with in the airline, and we were walking across London Bridge, and we were just behind this girl was carrying a backpack. She was a fully grown woman, and lots of tourists walking the other way, and every now and again she would just punch one of them in the stomach. This seems like a crazy story, I know, but she kept punching these tourists in the stomach, and people were, I guess it was the shock factor as well, but people were turning around going, did that really just happen? When we were walking behind her, we saw her do it maybe 4 or 5 times, and none of these people actually came back and said, you just punched me. Not one of them. They just carried on like it didn't really happen, and each one of them had been punched in the stomach. Then me and my friend Chris are a bit more, maybe we're a bit more like the social justice warriors, I don't know, but we went and stopped her, and we confronted her in the street, and we were trying to call the police over, but we kind of figured it wasn't going to be that much point, because no one actually stuck around to actually say,
right,
she didn't punch us, we just saw a punch all these other people. Well, it's our word against hers, but it's still the fact that we confronted her, at least she stopped doing it right then and there. But it was one of the craziest things that people didn't even defend themselves or confront that. And for me, it is in some ways an example of that, that there's almost this lack of desire to confront the things that are really affecting you or maybe even hurting you in your life.
Absolutely. I mean, it is a good example of that. And in this case, I mean, some people may be evaluating and saying, oh, this could be a crazy person, don't go and confront them. So there's some safety pieces that are, real and valid, because if somebody just randomly punches you, there's a possibility of some psychological disruption going on.
For sure.
But in the day-to-day, and here's, have a great example of somebody who is hurting their business by how they're handling some of their clients. So client who came to me after working with another coach, this other coach, they came to heads. They came to heads with things. And rather than the two of them sitting down and having an actual phone conversation, and my client was quite willing to have that conversation, instead, this other coach was sending her voice messages. So through an app called Voxer, she'd Vox her and just like chew her out. And of course, that kind of platform is one way. It's just like social media. It's one way. Nobody's interrupting you while you're ranting. And that is very destructive for your business, obviously, because you're not creating raving fans. You're not solving, here was a person who had spent, thousands of dollars, like almost $20,000 with this coach. And instead of dealing with it, she's just yelling at the client. And, that kind of thing long term is going to ripple out because people are going to talk about that. People are going to say, don't work with that person because she's crazy. So our inability to navigate our conversations effectively will affect our bottom line, and it will affect our sense of peace and all of those things.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
I'm curious, Dana, how someone makes the journey from dominatrix to a business performance coach and public speaker.
Okay, so I need to give a little bit of a backstory there. So the prompt in there. So I had my 7-figure business. We had staff. Everything's going great, and then we had several things happen all at once in the business. And it's kind of like the Titanic. When the Titanic hit the iceberg, it wasn't because it hit the iceberg. It was that it hit and opened 6 ballasts. If it only hit 5, the Titanic would still be alive, right? Yeah. So that was what it was for us. We hit that critical. We had one too many things that happened all in a very short period of time. So we actually had to restructure. I had to lay everybody off. And I decided to, open the business in a smaller version. But in that transition for me, in going through all the crazy, and then once I had space to think about it, I dropped in and I started to evaluate. I said, okay, beyond the stuff that happened, right? Beyond the people breaking into our merchant account, beyond the losing some of our top clients because they went bankrupt and didn't pay their bills, beyond the obvious, what went wrong? And it gave me a chance to stop and say, okay, so here I was with this, dominatrix piece, holding my power in my personal life. But in my business, I had segregated these 2 pieces. And so all of this power was over my personal life. I wasn't holding it in my business. So I wasn't leading the business effectively. And in restructuring, what I started to do was to bring those 2 pieces together, to bring in the energy. I saw a huge difference. Inside of 4 months, we went from losing $10,000 a month to profiting $5,000 a month. Huge turnaround, and it continued to grow, and I eventually sold it in 2016. But that transition, that ability to see how bringing that energy in would jump sales, it would make things easier, everything flowed. If I happened to slip out of that energy, things slumped again. So I saw for me, and then I knew that for business owners, and particularly for women business owners who are not holding their power, this is the missing component. Call it whatever you want. I call it the inner dominatrix energy, but it is missing if you're not holding your power.
Yeah, absolutely. And that makes a lot of sense. As a business performance coach now, then, what are the kinds of things that you work with people on?
Yeah, this is what I love is that it's a range. So people will often come to me with, the surface problem is something is not working in their business. So maybe they've hit a plateau and their systems are no longer working. That's really common. Or, they've had a successful business in the past, they've transitioned to something new and they're not getting it off the ground. And even though, all the things that they used to do to be successful, again, the systems are not working. That's a pretty central piece. Now, what's going on underneath that is that they're in the midst of what some people call a spiritual crisis. It's a coming back to is like what's missing? What's the piece that you ignored in order to have success in the past? Because that's coming home to roost, and that's what needs to be dealt with. So it could be dealing with their relationship. It could be dealing with past traumas. That's very common, childhood things. And then, I always end up weaving in a little bit of business strategy, marketing strategy. And I do channel a little bit. So I channel business marketing, which is really fun. Yeah. It's a whole new way to do marketing.
I'm across that. That's a first for me, Dana, and I'm fascinated.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the important things as well. there's a lady called Sally Hogshead. I don't know if you've heard of her. She has
Mm-hmm.
a thing of How to Fascinate, which
Yes.
to me was enlightening. And this whole thing of, it's important to be fascinated and to be fascinating as well. And I think sometimes it's the being fascinated that helps make you fascinating as well to watch. But yeah, it's a whole big thing. She's certainly someone I want to approach in the future for being a guest as well. She's incredible. Okay, so I want to come back to the business performance coaching then. When you're working with someone, particularly now when there's a lot going on, what are the things that you would be encouraging people to be focusing on and working on right now?
Okay, so let's dive into some tools, because we've talked a lot, and it's fascinating, but I also love for people to have some actual tools. So first thing we need to do is to get people on board with the idea that you have the ability to pick up on other people's thoughts and emotions and feelings. And we know this. So if you've sat in an auditorium and you felt this sensation of somebody staring at you, the reason you can feel it is because we feel the energy of it. So whether they are at the back of the auditorium or on the other side of the globe, we have the same ability. And there's some fascinating studies that have been done. But basically, we just kind of want to extrapolate out and say, okay, if we have the ability to pick up on what's going on with other people around the globe, then in this time of global pandemic, what is the possibility that the anxiety that you feel is not all yours? If there's 7 billion people feeling a sense of dis-ease, anxiety, upset, then what if we suppose that 90% of what you feel is not yours? It's maybe even higher than that, but 90% is where I find most people can agree with me. So now the typical response when we're looking at, working with energy in the energetic field is people would do the shield or the bubble or the walls, right? Trying to protect themselves. Mm-hmm. But the challenge with that is that trying to protect yourself is as effective as trying to block an attacker. So in martial arts, if you try to block an attacker, you're still going to get bowled over. And this is what ends up happening energetically, is that if you try to block what's coming at you, then eventually your wall's going to crash down and it's just going to knock you over like a tsunami. So instead, if we go the opposite and we take our energy field and we go really, really big with it, we expand way out, make ourselves loads of space. And where I like to visualize for people is if we start with like an egg-shaped bubble around us, fill that bubble with your favorite color. Right. Doesn't matter what color, whatever your favorite color is. And then we're going to take that color, and it doesn't dilute as we expand out. Okay? So take your color and fill all the room that you're in. And then take the color and fill the house. And then we keep going out, fill the city. We keep going out, fill the country. Of course, you're in a small country. So now if you're in Canada, start with your province. So fill the country. And then, really go big out. Go right out to the size of the world. And notice that there's like more space in your body. There's a little more ease. Right. So now what this does two things. One, energetically, you have more space. And so when stuff is coming at you, you have the ability to perceive it from further away, which allows you to move. Which, just like martial arts, you want to be able to move out of the way and then drop your opponent on the floor. So with the expanding out, it allows you to have more space. It also allows you to have perspective because you're not crunched in with a tiny little, into a little ball. You're moved out, you have perspective. The moment you feel like you have perspective, then your brain starts to go, oh, I have more perspective. Oh, let me look at this differently. And so it gets on board. So this works, energy moves the physical. It does both. All right. So that on a regular basis, if people are expanding out. Now with my clients, we just keep going all the way out to infinite space. But for now, even the size of the world makes a big difference. If you can link that, so as you move about your day, every time you see the color that you picked, you're going to allow yourself to expand back out to at least the size of the world, if not more. And you're doing that on a regular basis. So if your color was blue right now, the blue of your shirt would remind me to expand out. And so that's the thing. It's like to think about what are the things that you're going to encounter in the day that are going to be the color. And then, just forward, projecting onto the fact that you see that color, you're expanding out. You'll set up the habit to be expanding out on a regular basis, and then you're not in overwhelm all of the time. So that's always the foundational piece that I get my clients doing. Now, the other piece of it is, playing with questions. That's the other tool that I'll give everybody, is playing with questions and dropping into that 5-year-old. Remember, you remember the 5-year-old, they're always like, why? But why is the sky blue? Why does it do that? Why is that? Why are the fish swimming? Why are why? They don't understand, right? Everything they want to know. They're totally curious. And they don't have an assumption about what the answer is going to be. Now, sometimes they're annoying because they don't listen to the answer, but they don't have the assumption as to what the answer is. And that's the thing, is to expand out and then ask yourself, I wonder how else I could do this. I wonder how else I could see this. I wonder what else I can choose, right? In that wonder question, as opposed to the why question, because a why question is as effective as analyzing your poop. Don't analyze it, just flush it.
Yeah.
Right? We say, why is this not working? Why am I so fucked up? Why is this like that? Those why questions are not helpful.
Yeah.
But when you add the wonder in front of it, I wonder why I'm so good at finding creative solutions. I wonder why it's so easy to make money. I wonder, you start to expand your possibilities.
Yeah, I like it. Some of the coaching work I've done over the years, I'd say, one of the things I do without trying to label it as this, because I think people get a bit uptight when if I start talking about things like victim mentality and the likes. But the victim mentality is the why me? Why is this happening to me kind of thing. And that's not really a place, as you say, the why questions aren't good ones to ask. And instead, the better questions to ask are the how. How good could I cope with my life being? How successful would I be able to withstand? Those are better questions to be asking yourself, because whatever questions you do ask rhetorically or otherwise yourself, your brain is looking for ways to answer them, even if you're not conscious of that. And you're going to see that showing up in your experience. So now I could say in the past, and I was talking about this on a group coaching call last night, that I used to have this sort of connection between something good would happen, but then my expectation was something bad had to happen, because I wasn't allowed to have things that good. It's like, no, that's not for me. So where is it? What am I waiting for? And then the next thing is this expectation of this bad thing is going to happen and wipe me out, which always did. And that was really that expectation and that focus on the past experience or whatever, dictating for me what was going to come next, until I shifted from that and started asking myself better questions and started focusing on what I can do rather than what I can't do or what's going to go wrong or what's going to be bad. That life got so much better. Even if you sort of think, well, maybe you're just deluding yourself, well, maybe you are, but you're still going to be better off, because you're going to have a better life experience. And the chances are you're going to see those things reflected in your life and the things that turn up as well, because that's what you're focusing on, instead of the poor me, why me, and why is it like that? And so you're thinking of how, and getting into that, that kid's book, Lemony Snicket. I love that thing from the film of There's Always a Way. There's always a way, that you're much better off with that kind of mentality, that whatever it takes, there's always a way, there's a solution to this, the Marie Forleo, everything's figure outable, that's a much better, healthier mindset that's going to get you results.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the majority of people, I will just address one piece in this, and that, like, if anybody listening is in the place where you've heard these things before and you're really resistant to that, that's not going to work. Just, I've tried that and that's not going to work. Then to recognize that is your subconscious mind trying to keep you safe, because at some point taking risks created a bad result. And so it's also about going a little bit deeper with the subconscious mind for some reprogramming, because just asking the questions sometimes will reactivate your resistance. And in flipping around those deeper programmings makes it easier to step in as opposed to needing to repeat it 1,000 times to get it to shift.
Yeah, that's important to say. You have a book called Badass Intuition. What is Badass Intuition? Explain that.
So Badass Intuition is a 6-week boot camp to take you through step-by-step process, getting in touch with your actual intuition. So this is not your gut response that sometimes is mistaken, like, with your subconscious, but it's actually dropping in to connecting with that piece, that inner wisdom that has never been wrong. That niggle that comes up that says, oh, I don't think you should do that. And then you go and do that and you're like, yeah, it was right. To actually be able to tap into that ahead of time, differentiate between what is your intuition and what is your conditioned response to things. So it's a 6-week process to get you started. And then there's the next level is reach out to me for going deeper with it.
Yeah, we have your cat has an answer for us as well, I think.
Yes, I was hoping you couldn't hear her. She wants in.
She's going to be on taking the stage with you, I think. Right. So that is something that people can get a bit of a taste of that from you for free, right? You've offered people to be able to access that for free.
Yeah. So if you go to innerdominatrix.com, you can download a full copy of the Badass Intuition, get you going with your boot camp there, and really start to get yourself trained on differentiating what is your actual intuition versus the clutter in your mind. So it's very, very helpful.
Yeah. I know there were a few other things that I wanted to hit on you today, but I also want to respect your time. You're very, very generous with it, and you're giving us so much great value here today. And I know you said you'll return back again in the future, and we'll discuss the sort of cult influence and some of your experiences with that as well. Is there anything that you would, like we talked about things like women in negotiations and how to deal with your own stuff. Is there anything that you particularly wanted to make sure that we do cover before we start wrapping things up for today?
I think we've touched on a lot of things, and I would say, for anybody listening, the biggest thing is to, if your subconscious mind is trying to tell you that, oh, that's impossible, I can't, it's always been this way for whatever little slice of it, to start the nudging of like, well, what if I'm wrong? What if that's a lie? And definitely, reach out if you want some help in moving things through. But to start with that piece of try out the tools of expanding out, try out the questioning. And then if you're really getting resistance, it's like, well, what if I'm wrong? Because your subconscious mind is telling you all this lies of, you can't. And until we challenge it, we're never going to shift it.
Yeah. One of the things that was wonderful on the group coaching call that I did last night was a really powerful call, and thankfully it's recorded, so I'm going to go back and re-listen to it when I get some time at the weekend. But some stuff came up on there that some people have been working with for quite a while, finally hitting those breakthrough points of, you know what, I'm just going to go for it anyway. That all these things that most of the time when people are feeling held back, it's just because they're holding themselves back more than anything else. And like you say, the subconscious mind talking to you saying, I can't do that, or that's not for me, or that's for taller people, older people, younger people, slimmer people, bigger people, I don't know, whatever it is that you're telling yourself is the reason why you can't do it, maybe the exact reason why you should be out there doing it, and certainly is something that you need to stop listening to and just go and do it anyway. And who cares? Just see what happens. Just get out there and do it, because you're going to have a much richer life and experience for that. And I see that for myself. I see that with my clients. I see you share similar sentiments as well. And it's just so important to get out there and do it. What is would you say that's maybe the number one thing you could do then for channeling your inner badass, your inner dominatrix, or is there anything else you could add to that?
I would really say, start with those pieces. And then if you want to go further, pick up some of the books and start applying some of the tools there. So I think we need to wrap up because these cats, both of them are now yelling at me. So
they want their mother. So I'm going to let you go and take care of them. But Dana, thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to having you back, and we'll get more into the cult stuff and the dark side of influence and persuasion and everything. All the links to all of your book and information is going to be in the episode description, so you can go and find out more about Dana. Go and check on her website, download the digital copy of Badass Intuition, check out some of her other books and talks as well if you get the chance. Dana, thank you so much for giving us your time and so many insights and wonderful stories today. It's been a real pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much, John. I've thoroughly enjoyed this.
I'm glad to hear it. I'll look forward to speaking and connecting with you again very soon. Take care. Go and look after those cats.
I hope you enjoyed the show. Tune in next time. If you think you'd make a great guest on the podcast, or you know someone who would, please get in touch with us. Today could be the perfect day for you to start your own podcast. Whether you're looking for a new marketing channel, you have a message you want to share with the world, or you just think it would be fun to have your own talk show, it is. Podcasting is an easy, inexpensive, and fun way to expand your reach online. Buzzsprout is hands down the easiest and best way to launch, promote, and track your podcast. Your show can be online and listed with all major podcast directories like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more within minutes of finishing your recording. Podcasting isn't hard when you have the right partners, and the team at Buzzsprout is passionate about helping you succeed. Join over 100,000 podcasters like myself already using Buzzsprout to get their message out into the world. Find the link in the show notes. See you next time.